Hey, come on in. So I'm going to get rolling, and people will filter in as they will. So welcome. How many people have not been in this room before? There's my people. So this is Teachers on Teaching in Teaching and Learning Services. I went ahead and got rolling. Are you recording? Yeah. Groovy. Teaching and Learning Services generally is charged with elevating the craft of teaching across all modes, across online, blended. Even though technology is the part of the iceberg that shows above the water, we're actually supposed to be helping you improve as teachers. And one of the best ways we can think of to do that is to curate a selection of teachers to share their teaching practices with you today. In a brief moment, I'll introduce Miguel Cardona to you. But first, I just want to say, there's a certain, I call this off-label technology. There's a certain expectation that what we in my department give ourselves permission to tell you about is my courses, Adobe Connect, the tools for which you can pick up the phone or email or live chat with our support desk around. So we're taking a little bit of a risk here in showing you a technology that exists out in the world that's not formally adopted. We don't have an enterprise contract for this stuff, but it matters. It matters because it's elevating the ability to communicate in the classroom and improving accessibility measures. So that's thing one I wanted to tell you. Thing two is, if you're a teacher out there and you have an idea for an effective practice you'd like to share, email me. You can Google my name. It's Jeremiah Perryhill or jlpetc@rit.edu. Or generally, find me at www.rit.edu/TLS, that address at the bottom of the board, and pitch your idea for a Teachers on Teaching presentation. We love doing these. As far as upcoming talks, on Monday, December 3rd, we'll have Bob Barbado talking about teaching critical thinking, a modeling approach right here in this room. You can register at tinyurl.com/18TLS. So, without further ado, a little bit about Miguel Cardona. Did his undergrad in RIT New Media, MFA Industrial Design right here at RIT, founding member and lead interaction designer at Dumbwaiter Design, a company many of you have heard of. He left us briefly. He went to San Francisco to work at a Y Combinator funded startup called Imagix. Imagix is the secret sauce behind websites like Reddit, Kickstarter, Foursquare, Twitch. Their business in general is to reduce the load time of websites by delivering images really fast because they're optimized and cached and all that good stuff. He helped them raise $11 million toward that effort. Then somehow, prodigal son came back to RIT, first as a visiting assistant professor and now an assistant professor in new media design, focusing on user experience design. I want to say we welcome questions throughout the presentation. Please join me in welcoming Miguel Cardona.
Thank you. Thanks, Jeremiah. I really appreciate it, and giving me the opportunity to kind of share a little bit about what I do in the classroom. So for those of you following at home, everything that I'm going to be talking about today is going to be at this URL. I'm going to be talking about using technology, as he mentioned, kind of like almost like Black Ops technology, doing things that aren't necessarily sanctioned by RIT, but definitely helps me communicate, work with students in the classroom. As an interaction designer, I'm constantly looking for ways to just kind of like make things better, make my life easier. And I'd like to just kind of share some of that with you, and that's what the foundation of this talk is going to be about. So if you go to miguelcardona.com/teachersteaching, I recommend checking it a little bit sooner than later. It might get taken down at some point in the near future. I would highly recommend that you don't share that URL, mostly because the files in which that I'm sharing, it's not meant to be public. And not that I have any like copyright infringement on it. It's just kind of like a terms of service thing. These should not be public, otherwise Dropbox will kind of like shut down my page. So it's for your internal consumption. At some point, I'm just gonna like turn it off. So you can like log on, and then you could have access to it. But then I'm gonna turn off the public access to it at some point. So this is for internal sharing and use. Okay, so a little bit about the presentation. I am constantly just looking to find new ways to kind of pace myself in the classroom, ways in which I can have students kind of like work with each other, as well as, in the design school, having a lot of visual learners, how am I making sure that they have all the content that they need, that I'm following up, and as well as just following through with like course continuity. Making sure that the students who don't show up in the class are still getting a good experience if they're not able to make it one way or another. And this constantly just has me questioning the tools that we use regularly for this, and what's easy for me and still most effective for the students. Anybody ever read the Atlantic article, this is back from the 1930s, As We May Think by Vannevar Bush? So not that many of you. I highly recommend this read. It's basically what spawned the technology that we have today. In this article, it's essentially a future ethnography, whereas beginning to think about in a post-World War II era what our scientists and researchers are going to be focused on, how are they going to like catalog and use research. Essentially in the document, he began to outline technologies that we take for granted today. And this is like in a space that no one had really thought about anything like this before. The centerpiece of this article is the Memex machine. The reason that I'm bringing this up is because this machine is meant as a tool of research, wherein a description was kind of rudimentary tools for linking documents, sharing information, so that way other researchers can kind of like use that information, kind of further sort of the pursuit of knowledge, right? Within this, there's two screens, there's knowledge going through, there's images being shared, links are being made. And if you really think about it, that was like the promise of the internet, is being able to kind of facilitate the experience of knowledge share. The reason that this is really important is because it's kind of like the foundation. Whenever I'm looking at tools, I want tools that empower. I want tools that kind of work well in the way that I'm working. And that's not always the tools that you're given. So sometimes you have to kind of deviate a little bit. First off, I'm just going to start off with a couple practices that I use in OS 10. Part of this talk is focusing on accessibility. And this accessibility, the first thing I'm going to identify is just zooming. So like I apologize if you're on a PC out there. In College of Art and Design, we use more Macs, and there's just some really awesome built-in tools that the Macs utilize. So I'm just going to jump over here and just begin to walk you through some of those. As mentioned, that URL that I gave you all, and like once you log into it, I can see who logs into that URL. It is a Dropbox Paper page, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Dropbox Paper in my use in teaching. But basically, everything that I'm going to be outlining, all of the demos that I'm going to do, I have, just before this talk, went through and kind of like documented in this document, relatively easy. And I'm going to share with you just some of those practices. The first thing, whenever I'm doing a demo in a class, in College of Art and Design, I do a lot of software demos. Typically, I don't want software to be the centerpiece of my teaching. I want to focus more on fundamentals, principles, procedures. But software is kind of like that necessary evil that you have to identify the students on how to use and best practices. So there's a lot of software demos. The problem with software demos is that there's a lot of areas of software that are very small. And for those in the back of the classroom, it's kind of difficult for them to kind of see. OS 10 offers the opportunity to have zooming as part of that package. It's not turned on by default, but instead you have to go into the accessibility settings and turn it on. Let me just demonstrate the zooming for you really quick. So let's say if I'm just in this document and I want to zoom in, I can easily do so. I can move my cursor down here and I can zoom into that area. So let's say as I'm moving through this document, I can begin to scroll. The action that I'm performing to do this zooming is just holding down the control key and scrolling up on my touchpad. If you have a mouse, you can use the scroller as well. So this is a behavior that whenever I'm teaching even code or I'm working with anything that is focused on a particular area of the screen, this benefits the students in the class, like tenfold, because there's always the ones in the back, and it's kind of difficult for them to see, and they might not always identify that they're having that difficult seeing. So here, if I go to zooming, once again, zooming features, right? I use it consistently. I use it to emphasize my points, right? It works system-wide. Any application that I have open, I can easily zoom in. The way that you can turn this on, now all of these shortcuts I've outlined here, right? So I can actually, you open up the system preferences, you go into the accessibility, right? Here, you just identify the zoom, and you can use a scroll gesture with modifier keys. So I'm holding down the control key and zooming up. If that conflicts with any software that you may be using, you can customize that further with what modifier key is going to work best for you. The first thing that I do on any desktop when I begin a lecture is I turn on those accessibility settings just to make it much easier for me so I can outline that. So beyond that, this is kind of what it looks like. It's like there's that zooming. Whoops. So there's like I mentioned, there's advanced options as well. So you can smooth images. You can have zoom follows keyboard focus, right? So there's additional options in there if you feel that the zooming isn't working for you in particular. But for me, I just go into that desktop setting, I turn on zoom, I click the control, and I'm good to go. You can even set minimum and maximum zoom, and there's shortcut keys in the event that you get stuck in that zoom to kind of jump out of it, okay? And that shortcut key is right here. You can choose to toggle the zoom so that basically you can just kind of jump back out if you feel it's a hindrance or not necessarily working in your flow. But I highly recommend that if you're doing anything on screen, even this, I'm just giving this presentation and I want to draw your attention, and I can zoom into it. And it just helps people see that a little bit better and helps draw your focus. Okay. Next up, multiple desktops. Okay, multiple desktops is something that you might use in your own personal. Like this is if you've been using a Mac, you probably used multiple desktops before. You probably never considered it for your presentation. I'm currently using it in my presentation to identify all of the main areas of this presentation. So if I hold down the control key, I can swap from my full screen view presentation. I hit control right. I have the notes that are basically my whole screen view presentation that comprise it. I have my area on multiple desktops. I have what I'm going to be talking about with my courses, all the way down to a demo screen that I have here. Where did it go? Oh, I think I lost that one. I'll get back to it in a moment. Here we go. All the way down to a demo screen that I have here that I'm going to work with you, right? Multiple desktops give me the opportunity to divvy out my screens in an organized manner. It actually doesn't take much to set up. Once you actually get onto a desktop workstation, more often than not, you're standing at a teacher station that will be wiped clean, so you might have to set it up every time. But the setup is relatively easy. You hit Control Up, right? Over here, you'll see the desktops. I can add one, right? Or I can also remove one. Okay, and basically what that allows me to do is to have applications in those different windows and begin this sort of like spatial recognition with those screens. Most oftentimes I'm only using two, right? I might have my notes or my presentation on one of those screens, and then I might have the active work that is being demonstrated on another one of those screens. Yes? Because I use them pretty like ephemerally, like I'll just kind of create them ad hoc or typically for the presentation, it's just desktop 1, 2, 3. They also kind of get reorganized. If you full screen an application, that full screened application will be named. So right here, that one's Google Chrome. So if you full screen them, it will identify the thing that is in that given screen. But this way I can toggle between my full screen application as well as the tabbed applications that I have in these other windows. If you have a window and you want to bring it into a new desktop, all you need to do is press Control Up, and I can just drag this wherever I want it to be. So I can drag this over into desktop 7, and I click it there. It gives you the opportunity to reorganize your screens. You can basically assess mentally, where it is that you're working. And it also helps the students begin to identify, oh, okay, this bit of content. Okay, we're moving over there. Okay, we're moving back. Over here in my notes, and I apologize if I'm zooming way too much. I'm just kind of doing it for the demonstrative purposes. So here I identified, okay, you have the Control Up arrow, you move your mouse to the top of the screen, you move your mouse over to the right, and basically you can add those. So the keyboard shortcuts are Control Up, Control Left, and Control Right. Those few keyboard shortcuts are already built in, and it just gives you the opportunity to begin to organize those screens. You're not fussing around with kind of like layered windows. And even if you have a few screens already on an existing area, so if I were to tab through and create some new windows, The second that I push Control Up, it organizes them in a fashion that allows me to better deal with them, right? This is nothing new. This is software that was essentially built into OS X back in like 2006. But oftentimes we tend to forget about this or don't necessarily think about these things when giving like a live presentation or a demo. But it really helps the audience begin to understand where you're working, what screens you have, and as you begin to kind of like organize and work through either a website or an application that is active, right? It gives you the opportunity to better organize that. So if I press Control Up, I can choose this tab, I can close it out. If I want to take this tab over into Desktop 7, I can easily do so. If I want to easily switch back, right, I have that visual association of where I'm at. One thing you'll also notice, I've color-coded my backgrounds. Now I understand that there are those that might have sort of like color visual issues, right? One of the reasons that I use color-coded backgrounds, the majority of my students are better able to identify what they're working on, or where I'm working on. I most often use this whenever I'm teaching a coding language. So if I'm working in HTML, CSS, JavaScript, right, there's a lot of written text that's going to exist on that screen, and oftentimes I'm working with an interpreter, and they need to know when I'm talking about HTML or if I'm talking about JavaScript. So I typically work with my interpreter and I'll identify something codified on my screen to help them better understand what it is that I might be drawing focus on. This is also helpful for the deaf student when they're looking up at the screen, they're looking at their own screen, and they're looking at the interpreter to better identify what I may be talking about. Because if I'm swapping from HTML to CSS, you know, they're just seeing, you know, like text going up on the screen. You know, they're 1/3 of their attention is kind of focused on that. So it helps them get like at least a visual placeholder. So this is something that I can establish before the class, or I can work with the interpreter to better identify. So if there are color vision issues with that, you can find other ways to best mitigate it. Typically, I try to keep that to as few screens as possible. In this program, in this presentation, I have a number of different screens. And I'm just kind of using that for myself to better identify where I'm at. The background change is relatively easy. I just control-click, change desktop background, and I can pick a color. So it literally takes maybe 5 minutes to begin a class, create an additional desktop, go to that desktop, change that desktop background, and give it a value that can be sort of representational in a way that's meaningful for the students. Otherwise, when you're swapping between those screens, it's a little bit harder to discern what screen that you're on. Creating those visual associations typically help my students, especially when they persist across an entire semester, so that they know when I'm working on HTML, I'm on the red background. They know that when I'm working on CSS, I'm on the green background. And then I'm going to swap between those. Okay, so I know that that's a very specific use case, but it was just a practice that I use to kind of help out. For the interpreter, as they're interpreting, they can see the reflection of the color on their hand, on their arm, and have a better sense of when I'm switching. So they would see me swap between the green and the red. They could see that reflection on their hand and kind of make that change. It's been about a year or two since I've had deaf students in my coding class, but typically that has worked before. And what the encouragement is from me is basically just begin to think about, you know, what can you use as a visual reference to begin to kind of communicate to your audience ways that's kind of signal where you are, right? Using an existing mental model and helping them better understand where they can be and where they're going. Okay, so as mentioned, that's changing desktop colors. Or it could be textures, it could be visuals, anything that can help them better associate what is on the screen at the given time. Last little bit, mastering screenshots. So when I'm working, oftentimes when I'm giving demos, and this is going to be the next technology that I'm going to demo. Right now I'm actually just walking through notes. I understand that, you know, they're just saying like a lot here, and it's a lot to kind of take in. But let me throw this into presentation mode to make that a little bit easier. So these are essentially my notes. This tool that I'm using is Dropbox Paper. Dropbox Paper basically allows you to take any notes that you have and essentially turn into a presentation mode. So before coming here to give this demo, I would just scatter down what I wanted to walk through, right? I created screenshots to better establish and identify, the practices that I'm imparting on to you all. I've also taken animated screenshots so you have a better sense of what it is that I'm talking about. And I did so relatively quickly by utilizing these keyboard shortcuts that I'm going to show you. So I identified changing desktop colors, right? So mastering screenshots. When you're working in OS X, there are a number of different ways in which you can take a screenshot and you can kind of save it for later. Typically, as mentioned before, I'm demoing a lot of software to my students. In my current class of graphical user interface, I'm teaching them InDesign, Illustrator, Photoshop, Figma, Principle, only to name a few applications, right? So for them to have to go back and to reference a particular feature or shortcut, it can be kind of demanding if it's not well documented. So I typically use the same method that I'm kind of disseminating this information to you all by giving you that URL, allowing you to go to this page. I quickly kind of assemble a lot of those notes and make them available. Most often, I'm actually doing that during a demonstration. Doing these kind of like live demos and taking screenshots during a presentation allow me to be paced a little bit more when giving the demo. Also allows students to have access to that page live as I'm giving the demo. I'm going to walk you through that really quickly. So right here, this is the next technology I'm going to be talking about, Dropbox Paper. Dropbox Paper is very similar to maybe Google Docs or any online word processing service that you've used before. What's unique about Dropbox Paper is that it doesn't necessarily follow the conventions of something like Google Docs. Google Docs is still very much page-based, right? So it's an individual page, individual page, individual page. It's still using old metaphors to kind of like draw on the way that it's built, right? Microsoft Word has tons and tons of utilities to try to format your document. Dropbox Paper focuses on the most simplest aspects of document creation and thinks of it as a continuous flow. So typically, if I'm going to be doing a demo in a class, I'll say in class demo, right? I will share this URL right here, even if I open this up in an incognito page, right? I'm not logged into this page, but anyone with that URL can see that page. So see, I'm not logged in right here, and it's fully accessible. So I can share that link on my courses, or I can share it in another method, and I'll show you. So anybody with that link while I'm teaching a class. So if you all had computers in front of you, if you went to that first link that I gave you, the miguelcardona.com, all that's doing is referencing one of these Dropbox Paper pages. So as I begin to demo, right, so here over here, this is my authoring environment. Here over here, this is my sort of incognito user. I can notice, like I'm logged in and I can see that there is an incognito user. When I'm teaching, I can see all of my students load into this page. So if I'm giving a software demo, I mentioned that I'm going to be giving either links and or screenshots or certain aspects of my demo that they might need to review or that they might need to catch up on. They can easily do so by being in this shared document. It also gives them the opportunity to ask questions and not necessarily interrupt my lecture. So it gives me the opportunity to write down notes. So let's say, for instance, let me just jump over here. I'm going to bring this window just a little bit closer. Okay, so I'm jumping between these two screens. Let's say if I'm doing a demo here, and I'm creating a layout grid, and this layout grid is going to have a column set, and there's margins. So on this screen, there's a lot of information that's being communicated, right? I can zoom in for the students, and I can begin to walk through the properties that I'm using in this particular bit of software. So I zoom in, they can actually see everything in the back of the room. They can see sort of that result. So if they need to review this, or let's say, they looked away for a moment, they looked down at their phone, they might have missed something, what I can do is, whenever I realize there's one of these sort of key points, right, I'm gonna hit Command-Control-Shift-4, right? I get this little icon right here, see that? And it gives me the opportunity to take a screenshot. I can take that screenshot and I'll say, setting up your grid. So as I'm giving the demo, right, it then shows up for the student user. So then this way, as I'm moving through the demo, one, I'm paced a little bit because I can go really fast, right? I can just go and go through the entire demo and they're gonna be like, God, I missed that all, right? Or for the student who might not be there for the live demo, right, they will have the opportunity to review this content. For any other student who is logged in, right? Right now, this is not logged in. If a student is logged in, they can actually click comment and then ask a question on this live doc. For students to get logged in to Dropbox Paper, they can actually just use their RIT Gmail account. Dropbox Paper is a free service for the way that we use it in class, right? So if you have a Dropbox account, you can create a Dropbox account with the RIT student Gmail. Once they have that, they can come into this document. If they're logged in with their official account, I can actually take roll call and see everyone who's like live in this document. So I can just move up here. I can see everybody who's in that document. This is not dissimilar to Google Docs. It's just a little bit simpler and a little bit more intuitive. So once again, as I'm giving the demo, let's say I'm moving through this demo. I'm going ahead and I'm just creating like shapes, or I'm working on any kind of utility. As I'm working through this, I can give I could take that screenshot, or if like I have anything that's on screen, Command Control Shift 4, and I can take that screenshot and I can just paste this right in here, and this is now live in that document. Okay. As mentioned, if the student has a given question on that image, they can click this little icon right here and they can say, how did you do that? Right? And then they could even put in an emoji, a little thinking emoji. Okay? The emojis are actually a prime feature of Dropbox Paper, and I'll show you that in a little bit. Okay, and then this just gives me the opportunity to have a conversation with them in line. Other screenshots that can be had, Command Control Shift 4 spacebar will take the photo of an entire screen. So I can take a photo of the entire screen. One thing you'll notice is that when I take that photo, there's a little drop shadow that's there. If I take that screenshot, Command Control Shift 4 spacebar, hold down the Option key. I know this seems like a lot. I have a cheat sheet. It's really thinking about the construction of it. Command Control Shift, 3 or 4. 3 will do the whole screen. 4 will do a selected area. Append a space bar, it grabs a window. Hold down Option while clicking it, right? Gives you the opportunity to do that without the drop shadow. I know that seems like a lot, but to be honest, it only takes like a few days to become second nature. Actually telling you what the key buttons is more difficult for me than just my hands kind of making those gestures. But as I'm working along, I can make the demo live. This gives me the opportunity to basically give this demo. I don't necessarily have to prepare it ahead of time. I'm kind of working on it live, so if I decide to deviate or add something additional, it's all there, it's all well documented. Okay, and it's kind of made available for the student. So, talked a little bit about those screenshots. Let me go back here. So once again, this is all documented here. So Command Shift 3, Command Control Shift 3, Command Shift 4. I explain each one. Here's my review that kind of talks about constructing them. Really all you need is maybe 1 or 2 that kind of serves your primary purpose without hitting the Control key, I believe. Can't remember which one it is. Let's say, so if it's just Command Shift 3, it saves it to your desktop, right? As opposed to saving it to your clipboard. The reason that I outlined this here is so then that way you can review it after the fact. I realize it's kind of difficult to take this all in during a demo. But this entire doc is kind of made available. Yep, strips. Thank you. See, already got some comments. One thing, whenever you go here, the permissions are very easy, right? So right now, members and people with the link can edit. So technically, anybody can edit this document. Let me fix that. I'm going to change it to comment and share. OK, so now y'all can't mess with my document. But it's kind of stripped down. The settings, the permissions aren't as difficult. If anybody's worked with Google Docs before, you know that those permissions can be a nightmare to deal with. The settings and permissions here are pretty easy. And as mentioned, I can see everybody who is currently viewing this document. All right, let's go down to Dropbox Paper. So setting up, free to use a Dropbox account. Students can sign up with the RIT Gmail, simple control over permissions, right? It's easy to use, right? But there's a lot of advanced features. I'm going to show you some of those advanced features. So there's mastery involved, or it can just be like, oh, okay, pretty ephemeral. I just have this one sheet to represent this one class. Right now, this presentation is nothing more than a Dropbox Paper doc that I click the present mode on, right? I can actually go up here and change, whoops. I can go up here and change the mode from dark to light. I can exit out of that if I want to as well. Uses, I use it for my syllabus and course materials, presentations such as this. Students use it to self-organize, do their and deliver their process. It's a platform for discussion and critique with comments. And once again, this is like live documents without being overwhelming. Let me show you some examples of my course's content. I'm sorry, Dropbox Paper content that I've made available. Let me go back here. So here I have my Teachers on Teaching Dropbox Paper examples. These are all real examples. These are all just links to docs that I have on Dropbox Paper. This is what a typical syllabus of mine looks like, right? So I just put in a simple table. Right? And the way that I include a table, just click here, right? Drop in a table if I want to add more rows, if I want to add more columns, if I want to make it full screen, right? If I want to just do away with it entirely, it's gone. Let me just reformat this. Oops. Let me just reformat that. OK. So this is how my course might be set up. I actually just have a Dropbox page, and then I link the various pages that I create. So if I go into my syllabus, I'll have like a whole syllabus kind of formatted out. There's only a few options that you actually have. You can have an H1, an H2, and you can bold it, right? So this way you're not focused on the formatting. You just let the content flow. And you can see here, like, I'll have my syllabus, I'll use the tables, identify my students to some of the basic content. I can easily link things. Also, the benefit of this is as you build this out, there's a reference for that entire document over here on the left. So you can easily kind of navigate that as well. This is largely just built based off of the simple formatting that they have available. Let me go back here. I also use this for project scheduling and due dates. So this is a project that my class is currently working on with Rochester Regional Hospital. As we begin to identify, there was originally, this was the original project and we pivoted, so I just struck that out. Give them examples, project notes, students, they ask questions, so you kind of answer some of those. Here's like a week-by-week task list. As you make list items, and I'll show you this, you have the ability to actually assign due dates. So you can click here and see a full-on schedule. As you begin to use this, the complexity kind of reveals itself, right? It's kind of like progressive disclosure of complexity. It can, yes? Oh, OK. OK. So, yes?
I'm sorry, is this related to my courses or no?
This is not related to my courses. This is, if you go to Paper, I'm going to show you how I integrate this with my courses. But if you go to Dropbox Paper, paper.dropbox.com, you just sign in. The students can sign in. I usually have them create an account on their first day if they don't already have one. And what it does is anytime you create a new doc, you just get a blank thing, and you can kind of build it out. Like I said, I can say, new presentation. I can add in some notes like, do the thing, do the other thing. As I begin to work with these, I can begin to format this in a little bit more way that I deem necessary. I can make this a task list. And as I mentioned, the interactions with this utility, as you begin to work with it, there's like progressive disclosure, right? So I made this element, and then if you look over here, okay, I can just set a due date, and I can even tag a team member. I can jump in here, and I can tag somebody else. Who am I going to tag that isn't going to really care? Here, I'm going to tag Ali. So I can tag Ali. He's not necessarily part of my organization, but he's somebody who has viewed my documents. So I just tagged him, and chances are, if he's paying attention, oh, he just jumped in my document. Yeah. And then I could tag Ali. I'm just giving. He already left, I think. So I could actually tag him, and he can see that. He'll actually get a notification either through Dropbox. And if I were to actually begin to take this one step further, if I put a due date on this, now it says this Thursday, he's going to get an alarm. He's going to get like an invite for this Thursday to know that something's due. Yes?
So this is not supported by our IT, so I'm going to ask the pessimistic question.
Yeah.
What's your plan if Dropbox decides to take this out from under you?
I've already talked to them. They're not going to. This product was actually previously something known as, oh man, I can't remember the name now. Igor Kaufman, he's actually a friend of mine, friend of Imagix. They actually were a customer of ours. His company, Hackpad, it was called Hackpad. It got acquired by Dropbox, and it became kind of like a main feature. So I actually gave them a lot of what I wanted as they were still in beta before they rolled out this product. I mean, I don't have any official capacity. I'm not like supported by them. I just like using this tool and have talked to their product design team. I went to Adobe Max this year and actually talked with some of their support engineers to get get wind of any new features and the fact that this is going to be continuously supported. So for the time being, this has kind of been a big push of theirs to make this continually supported. So here, I'm going to show you actually something really cool. This is, as mentioned, I went to Adobe Max and I'm like, all right, what's coming out? And they're like, we're going to have Gantt charts. And I was like, sweet, Gantt charts. So I actually can go in here and kind of create a visual of when things are due for my students. I can change the colors, and it just sits in line into this document. So as I mentioned, the tool is really just, it's whatever you need it to be as necessary. So let me show you another example of kind of like real-time use. So here, this is something that's kind of made available to students. Each one of these tasks right here, so like in-class brainstorming, write-up, and proposal, all of these are linked within the same document. Any H2 that's made available, there's this little flag, and you just copy that link. I can bring this over into a brand new page. It'll go not only to that page, but then down to that link. So you can kind of link within a document, and you can link within other pages. The reason I brought up that Vannevar Bush article is because this is fundamentally a recreation of that tool, like interlinking and kind of creating and being able to research and share the document. This tool, as I've been using it, it's fundamentally kind of like the promise of the internet, right? It's like a live, living document that is kind of malleable, right? Based off of who you invite to it, who's viewing it, right? I can get those comments, but it doesn't feel restrictive. It is kind of as I need it to be. I'll show you a separate tool or another example. So once again, here are my examples. This is the second project for a class that I'm teaching right now. So here I have a project brief. I just copied and pasted a link to the PDF. It provides a preview, right? As I scroll down, I have the Gantt chart. so students can begin to visualize when things are due. They can kind of like hover over and see, that, okay, this date will be the ideation discussion. They could see when the end of project 1 is. They have a much more visual approach to this. Once again, I can see it in 1 week view. I can give it a month view, right? It's a fully interactive object within this document.
What's the chart called?
It's a Gantt chart.
Spell that.
I think it's G-A-N-T, like Gantt. G-A-N-T-T. There you go. Yeah, it's just like a timeline tool. Another thing that I'll note is that because I'm using Dropbox proper, Dropbox is a place for your files, I can actually just share a link, and I'll show you how that's used. If I go here to my Dropbox, if I have a bunch of files, and sorry about the massive mess in here, but if I have something that I want to share, I can copy the Dropbox link to that folder. I can paste that, and it automatically creates a directory, and then any student can go in and download those files. So if I need to share a mass of files with students, I can use now I'm using my personal Dropbox account because, trying to talk to their enterprise to get something official is it's a nightmare. And hopefully something that they work on, because to be able to work on this with an official capacity would be ideal. But the point is that this application contextualizes a lot of the links that you may be using in with other applications. So if I was to go here and I would just say add media, right? You can see these are all other applications that it uses. So if you're using something like Envision or Lucidchart, Pastebin or Pinterest, SlideShare or Speaker Deck, even Spotify, it will actually represent that object onto this page in context as an aspect of how that application works. So I'll show you another kind of feature. So if I were to go to YouTube, and let's say there was something on YouTube that I wanted to make available to my students. This is really important, the honest trailer for the Meg. So if I paste that there, it gives me that full context. The student is then able to view that video live in that document, right, with the appended link. I like to use this as well as if there is something important, if there's like a TED Talk, if there's something that's relevant that I need the students to kind of like view as part of the class, I can essentially link it in, and then they can view it. And just as easily, just kind of remove that. If students can subscribe to these pages as well and get updates. So right here, you'll notice that everything is in my interactive fall 2018 folder. This folder kind of contains everything that I have for that class. So I have my content lecture notes, my project team sign up. One thing that you notice, I mentioned that emojis are kind of important. So if I use an emoji associated with my title, it then becomes the file icon. And I'll show you how that's also relevant. So if I were to go back, I'm just going to go all the way back to my examples here. Oops. We're getting close to time.
We want to see some My Courses stuff too.
Okay, all right, I'm going to jump to the My Courses. So I'm just going to jump here. Let me go back. Anything that I need to look for, I can easily find. So if I want to look for a previous class, I can search, I can pull GUI, and I can kind of like make that available. So if I'm looking for something, I can easily find that, and I can jump in. So if I'm going to go back to my Teachers on Teaching, here I have my examples. I'll show you one quick thing, and I'm going to jump over to My Courses. I use this extensively with students to showcase their work. So I will make a page available. They can all log into this page, and they basically share their own documents. I use it so that way students can get feedback from each other. So if I were to go into Geoxy's page, I can actually see, here's her work. This is her page. On this doc, I can click on this, can basically view a gallery of this process work, and I could actually see where students left feedback. And I think a lot of that is just me using this as an example. But I can actually scroll here and kind of see what the students are kind of engaging with in discussion regarding that doc. I can even zoom in, zoom out. and get a sense of that process and work. Students also, go back to, see now I'm getting, go back to this page. So teachers on teaching, go back to my paper teaching examples. So students also use this, they self-organize their pages. So this is all interlinked within the page. I can go down to the prototype, and then this is using an external app called Marvel to basically generate the prototype so they can kind of like walk through that. If I want to full screen as well, I can click on this link and then go to the full screen version. So let's talk a little bit about my courses. My courses, one of the things that I like to do, so I identified here the news feed, custom My Courses images, reduce and customize navigation. When I log into My Courses, please don't have me do the duo push. Okay, here we go. When I log into My Courses, the one thing that I do is when I'm first setting up the course, I set up custom images, right? Otherwise, the images that show up are just like that. Right? And the student doesn't really have a visual association with the class. I want them to have an emotional association with the class. So what I do is I'll generate an image to help them get that sense of it, right? This was actually one of my older ones there. I have like the T-Rex with glasses. I use a lot of like stock photos and I'll just mash them up. However, you don't need to necessarily make them yourselves. Usually you have some pretty savvy students in your class and they can make them for you. So here I will show you some examples. So let me just jump here to My Courses, right? Here's the custom My Courses images. The images that I have set are 1080 pixels, about 460. I usually use color, big image, and a title to help them represent that. So I'll just walk you through the ones that I have here. So, just very, very simple. The simpler, the better. The more convoluted it becomes a little bit difficult. So just kind of quickly identify that for them. These were like older examples where I just kind of made it in class as like a way to kind of like demo Photoshop. This is one that a student made. So I would have them, like they would jump onto like Instagram and kind of like grab stuff off and kind of make it themselves. And I'd have them like, judge and say, which one are we going to have the course? So then that way, they feel a bit of an association with it. So the way to do that, you just go click on any image, change image. You go to upload over there on the right. I recommend using Unsplash. Unsplash is a library of free images. It's a community-driven. It's actually the second largest photo website by volume in the world. Also an ImageX customer. So all those images are ImageX Images, the company that I told you that I work for. I usually use that to kind of make something a little bit more custom, right? Usually a big color, like the name of the class. However simple will really help you, just help the student identify where they're clicking. Then it becomes muscle memory. Excuse me. Next up, reducing and customizing navigation in My Courses. So typically when you start up a new class, you have like a ton of these elements that go across. Basically, this is what I do. I go to edit this nav bar. Over here, you can basically remove elements. You can reorganize elements as necessary. I can also create a custom link. So if I'm teaching a class, I have that Dropbox Paper homepage that has the links to, the syllabus and the project timelines, right? So I create that custom link. I just share that, convoluted Dropbox Paper URL, and I just give it a name that is like meaningful. I drag it to the front. And then here it is. So here's my course homepage. So the student can kind of click on that and then go directly to that first page. One thing that I will note is in the news section, if you go to the news section of My Courses, I can literally set up that homepage that I made in Dropbox Paper. I can copy it. It copies that as rich text, and then I just paste it as my news item, so all my formatting persists, right? So essentially, this then becomes a link to those individual Dropbox Paper pages, right? According to Dropbox Paper, it's just a bunch of random links. I interlink them and I give them meaning, right? So I'm taking a bunch of kind of like loose, potentially ephemeral pages, but I'm giving them meaning, I'm giving them titles, I'm interlinking them. And what I notice most often is that students will just log in and they click on one of these, right? They log in, it's the first thing that they see for the course, they click on one of those, and then it knows where they are. I also use My Courses because all of this content, it's week by week, the way that it's driven. I go into the content of my courses. So I think, yep, I go here, right? So this is the news item, right? And all of this content is basically just copy pasted from my Dropbox Paper page. It retains the formatting, right? So I'm able to kind of have all this there. But I also keep a copy of each link week by week, right? So here I just create a new module, right? If I go into week 1, I just have a link to my Dropbox Paper page. I go new, create a link. Here when I create a link, I drop the Dropbox link right there, and then I'll give it a title to help establish, when those new files are there. If you might be thinking, all right, well, I'm using Dropbox Paper, but I really want to give them like a hard copy. I want it to be like saved for posterity. You can go over here. You can export. All of those pages can export dynamically as a PDF, Microsoft Word doc. If any of you, your Markdown heads, if you want to use Markdown so you can eventually convert it to your own HTML page, you could do that. So once it's ready to export, you can actually export whole folders and a whole course. And it'll actually give you all of those files. So the exporting is actually a nice utility. Typically what I'll do is at the end of the semester, I'll export out all of my files and I'll make those available in the event that it changes in the future, or so then that way it's still kind of saved with my courses. I've been teaching at RIT since 2006, and I can still go back to 2006 and get a lot of those files. So it is important that you do save that content as hard copies onto my courses. Any questions? Okay. Sorry if I'm going a little bit fast. I know I had a lot of content to go over. So, syllabus and course materials, basically use the docs as whatever you want them to. I have students submit Dropbox Paper documents. Sometimes it's their process. When I have one of those shared docs where they all share their own links, give them the opportunity to look at each other's work, give comments and feedback. I have a lecture that is, typically only about 2 hours, but I might have 44 students in there. It's not an opportune time to have a review and give feedback to each student individually. A lot of times they don't like to speak in class, so it gives them the opportunity to kind of engage with each other in that space, in the context of their work, because a lot of their work is going to be visual. And that way they can kind of showcase that process. A lot of students will kind of generate that, and then they'll use this presentation mode as a way of presenting their own work. One thing that I also use this for, so if I were to go to my teaching examples, they also use it for notes, like demo notes. So it's actually interesting, like I'll have a student, I wanted to know how they handle the motion tracking. The second I'm like, here, show me. He's like, cool. He opened up a Dropbox Paper page and then just started taking screen captures and writing notes as he walked me through his demo, right? So in this particular class, I know that this student, so this was actually student generated as I sat next to him and he showed me something, right? So they were just kind of mimicking the behaviors that I was doing in class, and then I was able to then take this demo and then give it back to the rest of my students, because there was something problematic, with the demo that we had used from the previous year, and that thing being that I had a professional come in, I took a video and I captioned the video. However, this was an outdated piece of, it was an outdated demo. There was like a few things that required some notes. So here I brought in a professional from the industry. I screen recorded their demo using QuickTime. I saved it onto my Dropbox Paper. I used an application called Camtasia to caption it myself. I exported the video. I had this available. I had students write these notes for me initially, and then the next year on the same demo, I had additional notes from another student that had a little bit better approach. So this document right here is really just this like live document around this particular practice, and now after the class is done, I can kind of take this kind of like live document that has been sort of ping-ponged back and forth between a member of the industry, a note taker in the class, as well as another student in the class that has a little bit more expertise in this particular thing, and then I can kind of disseminate it in a better way. So after this class is over, I'm going to take this document, this kind of like hodgepodge of a document and kind of notes, and then turn it into something a little bit more meaningful. In the meantime, any student who is actively engaged in this class, they can make more sense of this. They're able to kind of produce the outputs as necessary and perform the motion tracking demo. Also, just kind of like a note, students, when they're typically engaging in this, like for the first time, they're just like, oh, awesome, like, wow, right? Like they start kind of having their own kind of approach in it. Sometimes I'll throw in like a little smiley face. There's additional, little like kind of like feedback items that are here. They really get a kick out of this kind of stuff, right? They really engage in that discussion. I typically have them also ask me comments. So as opposed to just getting an email about the syllabus, usually I'll get a comment that's in line, in context. So I'll get a notification in my email, and it will show me exactly where the student is asking the question. So typically I'll ask them if there's any mistakes or if there's anything that you don't understand, leave me a comment in the Dropbox Paper doc, and I'm directed exactly to the point where that question is had. So I've had a lot of kind of like positive experiences using this, and as I continue to use it, I find new, different ways of using this application. But as I mentioned, the great thing about it is that the document becomes what I need it to be. Right now, this is a sign-up sheet. So I just put this online. I'm like, okay, sign up. Who are your groups? What's your team name? Then I'll assign you a task. So this document is essentially editable by anybody in that class, and then they can go in here. Like I said, they really get a kick out of using those emojis. It's like really meaningful for them to use an emoji. You just hit the colon sign, and then you have like a full set. Actually, for my next class, what I'm going to be doing is making custom emojis that are going to be specific to the class, because I think they're going to get a big kick out of that as well. Let's see. I know I'm like desperately out of time here. There was a few more technologies that I wanted to go through. The thing that I wanted to identify for my animations, I use this application called Giffy Capture. Don't let the fact that it's Giffy, kind of like, make you go like, oh, why would I do that? I like to give brief demos on my Twitter feed, and I take screen captures of little animations that I do that are like interface based. And a lot of times this is a way that I can reach my students. So if I go here, sorry if this is a little bit slow. I use Giffy Capture to do these demos. Right, so like even right here, I'm doing like a little demo of something. Giffy Capture allows me to make this animated GIF in as long as it took me to just perform that interaction. So if I were to use Giffy Capture, right, this is the window. By the way, for anybody here that uses Mac extensively, if you hold down the Option key while resizing something, any window, it'll actually, oops, sorry. If you hold on the Option key, it'll center to the middle, right? It's a little thing, right? Like if you have like a website and you want to like center it down to the middle, if you hold on the Option key, it does that. You actually will find uses for that, trust me. So what I can do here is I can actually screen record, anything that's going on. I don't really have anything too interesting going on here. But Giffy Capture, this is a tool that it can easily be installed in the labs. It's free. I've actually had it installed in every lab that I teach in. And what it does is it gives you the ability to generate this quick video. It doesn't need to capture the video as a GIF. It can also save it as an MP4 file. So I can go save as, and I can choose whether or not it's MP4 or GIF or both. So then now I have this kind of like portable, instruction bit. So now that that's saved, I have a large GIF, right? I have a video MP4, right? And what's most important is that, like, let's say I'm doing a demo as part of, Dropbox Paper. I can just go ahead and drag that animated GIF right in place to kind of show that like little fine-tune interaction.
I'm going to use my facilitation superpower for a minute here.
Okay.
We're all still here because we're being nourished, we're being fed intellectually by this. However, there's certain time-boxed services of recording and interpreting that I have to attend to. I want to leave with just one question, if I may, and that is, was there anything in onboarding your students that was difficult about this? Or if that doesn't align with your experience, what was your greatest pain point in all of this?
My greatest pain point? There was an assumed pain point that it would be difficult, but typically what I do is like I just have them check in, right? So like I have them log in and write a link or share an image as their kind of like inauguration into using this. And that just typically works. I normally find students just begin to use this in all their classes. Like I see them just kind of like keep their inventory of Dropbox Paper, and that's how they begin to use. Sometimes I say, well, I want this as a PDF, and they're still sending me a Dropbox Paper link, and I'm like, okay, that's great. Now just give it to me as a PDF. So they get so indoctrinated into kind of like having these, you know, these files that they want to like continue to gravitate towards them. So I think my pain point is sometimes getting them out of submitting things in Dropbox Paper, because it is potentially like if they delete it, then it's gone. You know, I mean, I can capture a lot of their files by adding it to one of my folders. Now it also kind of exists in my realm, which, you know, works out a lot, but still they can kind of revoke my access. So sometimes it is a little bit more difficult to then say, all right, now you need to upload something to your assignments on my courses, because the metaphors of this and the fact that it's not necessarily file-based, you know, it's more in line with how they're engaging in work. So it's kind of like it's a happy medium. But like I love it when I'm like, hey, show me something, and they go through their Dropbox Paper. You know, they're using it to make their task lists, and it could be used for anything. Like I have like, you know, bazillion to-dos. Oh yeah.
I gotta pump it. So I want y'all to thank me for drinking from the fire hose with Miguel Cardona. This has been so awesome. So please join me in thanking him. You have a lot to share, and I know you're very generous with it, and I know people can engage with you after this session. You know, as much as any of us can be generous with our time, I'm sure you can be pinged over email or, at the very least, refer people to good resources to go deeper on this.
Yep. As mentioned, if you go to miguelcardona.com/teachersteaching, everything that I've presented here, all of those links, all of my examples, you can basically peruse through and review. So I know that I went through a lot, and I knew that I was going to go through a lot, so I made sure to kind of like include that here in exhaustive detail. Yes?
Can I download this resource, or is it just
Yeah, you can go on that page, and then like as long as you log in, you can actually download them all as PDFs. Yeah,
So good. Thank you again.
no problem. Thank you.